Been 2 years without sex with my wife, and I'm about to lose my fucking mind. It's been 2 years since I had any intimacy with my wife, 37 female, and honestly, I'm about to lose my mind. Let me give you some context. My wife works a very physical job. She spends long hours on her feet every day, and on top of that, she's still breastfeeding our baby. By the end of the day, she's completely exhausted. I've really tried to be understanding. I know how demanding being a mom can be, especially with a toddler, and I've made an effort not to push her for intimacy. But here's the thing. She's never really been very sexual, and over the years, her libido has diminished a lot. At the beginning, she was still willing to offer me some intimacy in the form of oral sex, which was fine with me. But now, it feels like months go by between those moments, and I can't help but feel frustrated and lonely. It's starting to take a toll on me, and I find myself resorting to corn again, which I absolutely hate. It makes me feel ashamed and depressed. We've talked about it countless times, but I don't want to come across as whiny. I try to be patient and calm, but I have needs too. She has agreed to try and be more consistent, maybe once a week or at least once every 2 weeks. But it's been months, and I still have to beg for even that. It's pathetic, honestly. I'm so lonely, and the desire is overwhelming. I find myself sitting here with all these pent-up feelings. She promised me some intimacy last night, but then the baby stayed up late. Now it's the next night. The baby went to bed early, but she's somehow conveniently fallen asleep again. I'm sitting here, crawling in my skin, trying to ignore these urges like an addict. I don't know what to do anymore. After considering the advice I've received and doing some reflecting, I decided it was time for a serious conversation with my wife. Here's what happened. I started by asking her if she thought I could do more around the house or with our son. She said she appreciated me asking, but felt we had a good balance. Later that night, I decided to pick up dinner and read some more advice online. Something clicked, and I knew I needed to dig deeper. To my surprise, when I came out of the shower, she was waiting for me and asked if I wanted oral sex. She had been aware of how badly I had been wanting intimacy since Wednesday, and this was the first good moment to do something with the baby asleep and no physical work earlier in the day. I told her everything. I apologized for not giving her more non-sexual intimacy, and for sometimes piling on the frustration of wanting more. I asked if she was okay with her body, if she felt uncomfortable, or anything like that. What shocked me the most was her response. She wasn't feeling okay with her body. She shared with me that she had been dealing with something physically that I didn't know about, and she was planning to see a doctor about it. I then asked her if it bothered her that I would ask for oral sex in these tiny windows of opportunity when the baby is asleep. She assured me that it didn't bother her at all, though she did feel guilty when she wasn't up to it. But she also said that it was okay for me to ask for intimacy, even if it wasn't always possible. The best part came after. We had an honest and heartfelt conversation about prioritizing both solo time and time for us as a couple. We both agreed that we had let things slip, and it was time to make some changes. Our son was old enough now, so we could work on building our relationship again. We fantasized about finding time for each other, even in short bursts. We both agreed to ease back into our sex life and let it happen naturally, without pressure. The second best part? After our conversation, she gave me a wonderful blowjob. She still wasn't quite ready for full sexual intimacy, so we stayed up cuddling and watching a show together. I'm really grateful for all the advice and support I've received from others. I've learned a lot. To those who suggested I cheat, rethink your approach to relationships. People who pushed me toward corn were only making things worse, like handing a drink to an alcoholic. I was clear that it wasn't good for me. To the people who had an issue with me, I'm truly sorry if I reminded you of a model you've seen in your own life. Not all men are like that, and we need to do better. Update. Well, it looks like it's about to be 3 years without sex with my wife. A few days ago, something strange happened when I went to a strip club, and it got me thinking deeply. All of a sudden, I had this really unwanted thought. In my first post, I received a lot of criticism about not pulling my weight at home, about failing to prioritize non-sexual intimacy, and not communicating well enough. In the second post, I shared a breakthrough moment where my wife opened up about how a pre-existing condition, worsened after childbirth, was affecting her body. It was one of those game-changing conversations that gave me more perspective on what was happening. But after a few days, the pain was gone. Since that conversation, things in our lives have only gotten busier and more stressful. Our child is becoming more of a handful every day, and we've got a ton of house projects piling up. It's like everything in the house is falling apart, and we're both constantly running on empty. We're overwhelmed, to say the least. As our child has grown, they've started sleeping in our bed, which means I've been sleeping in their room for a while now. It's honestly helping everyone get better sleep for the time being. But, as you can guess, there's zero chance for intimacy. In that second post, my wife mentioned that although she wasn't ready for sex yet, she'd be open to giving me oral sex when I needed it. I've been trying to pick the right moments for this. I avoid asking on days when she's physically exhausted from work, or when the house is a mess, or during her period. I wait for those moments when things are calm, and we've had some non-sexual intimacy, when it feels right. But now, it's just turned into a waiting game, a desperate hunt for a spare 15 minutes when I can ask for some affection and release without feeling like a creep. It feels like I'm constantly trying to beg for it, and it's humiliating. I can count on one hand the number of times this has actually happened. She's agreed each time, as we discussed, but it always feels so desperate. Taking the advice I've received, I decided to just ask her directly about it. Is this condition you told me about the real reason, or is it just an excuse because sex isn't enjoyable for you anymore? Just tell me. She said she hasn't had time to see a dermatologist for it yet. I understood that, but deep down, the lack of physical release is eating me up. It's twisting my insides. It's making me sneak glances at other women, which makes me feel disgusting and lecherous. Thirst traps on social media pull me in so easily, and I can feel the urge to watch corn creeping back into my life. Here's something I know for sure. I will never be unfaithful to her. She's the love of my life, and the thought of hurting her is unbearable. With my wife out of town for a few weeks, I was feeling incredibly lonely, so I decided to go to a strip club. I chose the nicest one in the area and waited for the most attractive dancer. There she was, a woman who, in the past, I would have considered a lifelong fantasy. "How are you doing tonight?" she asked, and I admit I was honest with her. "I miss my wife. I'm lonely," I told her. She smiled and asked if I wanted to go to the back. "Yes, let's go," I replied. She removed her top and started dancing in front of me. I waited, hoping for that familiar rush of excitement, that electric feeling that I used to get, but it never came. I sat there for 5 minutes, feeling nothing, just numb. I paid her the $25, walked out, and went home. The first thing I thought, and the thing I was really testing, was this. My wife is the only woman I want to be with. Maybe I've just aged out of wanting those kinds of encounters, or maybe I just never truly wanted anyone else. Now I'm sitting here today, feeling lost, lonely, and depressed. I keep praying that when our child finally moves to their own room, maybe we can start rebuilding our connection, start from scratch. But then again, maybe this is just it. Maybe we've both aged out of this, and maybe we're just not compatible anymore. I don't know what's next. Update. It's been 3 years, and I've had sex with my wife exactly once. After waiting over 6 months, she finally saw a specialist, and it turns out she's been dealing with several health issues. One of these is so serious that when she told me, we both ended up in tears. Despite everything, this year for my birthday, we managed to go out for a dinner and show. We even got a hotel room, with our kids staying at a babysitter's place. To my surprise, when we arrived at the hotel, she walked in wearing new lingerie. This was a big deal because, to be honest, she's never been the most sexually expressive person. She's a victim of sexual assault, and so for her to make that effort really meant something. That night we had sex. The next morning we did it again. It was enjoyable, but I could tell she was still in some discomfort, or at least not physically at ease. Even though it wasn't perfect for her, she was putting herself out there. I found myself in a bit of a bind. I was enjoying the intimacy, but I also wanted her to be okay, to feel good and enjoy it too. I offered her oral sex or a massage, but she wasn't up for either. I think the truth is she just doesn't feel healthy in her own body right now, and it's hard for her to relax fully. Though, things aren't exactly where I want them to be in our sex life. But for those who've told us that our marriage is over, or that we're headed toward cheating, I don't think they truly understand what it means to love someone with every part of who you are. Yes, I wish we had more sex. That's true. But would I trade those moments for the simple things we share every day? Raising our kid together, holding our hand while we watch movies? Absolutely not. I'm not entirely sure where we go from here. She's been prescribed medications to help, but she's terrified of the potential side effects. I'm not going to push her into taking them just so I can get what I want. That wouldn't be fair to her. Yes, she still gives me maintenance blowjobs, but now it's down to about once a month. Life is hectic. I don't want to pressure her after a long day of work, especially when she's already so exhausted. I plan on talking to her about finding time for intimacy once or twice a week, but even that feels tough. Between walking the dog in the mornings, making breakfast, getting the kid to daycare, working our jobs, cleaning the house, cooking dinner, picking up the kid, bath time, bedtime, and any spare moments for our personal projects, it's just draining. I can't deny that I wish things were different, but I also can't ignore the love and commitment I have for her. I'll keep trying to make it work, but I can't pretend that it's easy. Every day feels like a balancing act, and we're both trying our best to keep everything moving forward. Now, on to the next story. I intentionally got my coworker who has autism fired. I intentionally got my coworker John, who is on the autism spectrum, fired. Now I can't stop replaying everything in my head, wondering how I allowed myself to go so far. I work in the IT department of a medium-sized company, and until recently, I had a colleague named John. Let me start by saying that John was exceptionally good at his job. He consistently delivered high-quality projects on time and often provided insightful solutions during problem-solving sessions. While he wasn't the fastest coder, he was far from the slowest and regularly ranked as a top performer on our team. But there were some things about him that frustrated me. Things that didn't even really matter, but somehow got under my skin. John didn't have strong social skills. He was polite and professional, but he wasn't interested in the usual workplace camaraderie. He always shared his code and collaborated when necessary, but during meetings, he would never bring up any errors or challenges he faced. Instead, he focused on helping us troubleshoot our issues, which made him look flawless in the eyes of our managers. This earned him a lot of praise, and over time, I began to resent him for it. Another thing that annoyed me was his refusal to join us for social outings. Whether it was lunch, a drink after work, or watching a game together, John always declined. At the time, I convinced myself that his behavior was snobbish, as if he thought he was too good for us. Looking back, I realized how irrational and petty my thoughts were, but at that moment they festered into something more toxic. I began to dislike him. My frustration turned into something darker, an almost obsessive need to prove he wasn't as perfect as everyone thought. I started small. Whenever John stepped away from his desk for a coffee break or to use the restroom, I'd quickly access his computer and make minor edits to his code. I would add or delete a letter here and there, knowing it would cause bugs that were tedious to track down. John, ever the problem solver, never mentioned these issues to anyone. He just worked through them quietly, which, in hindsight, only reinforced his work ethic. But I wasn't satisfied. A couple of weeks went by, and I noticed that our managers were beginning to question John's recent performance. They called him into a meeting to address the sudden increase in errors. When he came back to his desk, he looked visibly shaken, but didn't say much. When I asked him what the meeting was about, he dismissed it with a vague explanation, which irritated me even more. Then I made the decision that still haunts me. John had been assigned a special project, a critical task for an upcoming launch. I saw it as my chance to expose him as flawed. One day, when he stepped away from his desk, I accessed his email and sent an incomplete and altered version of his code to the next development team. I then deleted the sent email to cover my tracks. I didn't fully understand the specifics of the project, but I knew enough to guess that the changes I made would cause significant issues. When the development team ran the final product, it crashed repeatedly. The errors delayed the project, and when they traced the problem back to John's code, the managers were furious. They confronted him, demanding to know why he sent out an incomplete file and didn't check it thoroughly. John was stunned. He tried to explain himself, but they didn't give him much of a chance. They accused him of slipping standards and terminated him on the spot. I stood there listening to the entire exchange. I felt sick, but I said nothing. I was too afraid of losing my own job if I confessed to what I'd done. It wasn't until later that I found out John was on the autism spectrum. He wasn't ignoring us out of arrogance. He simply found social interactions draining. His habit of working through problems alone wasn't a sign of pride. It was how he preferred to operate. Suddenly, everything about him made sense, and I realized how deeply I had misunderstood him. Now I'm overwhelmed with guilt. I think about how hard John worked and how much he contributed to our team. I might have ruined not just his career, but also his confidence. I keep replaying the moment when I could have come clean to management and saved his job, but I stayed silent. It's been less than a week since John was fired, and I'm seriously considering confessing everything to management. I owe it to him to tell the truth. Maybe it's not too late for them to reconsider and offer him his position back. I don't know if he'd even want to return after what happened, but I have to try. This weight is unbearable, and I don't think I can live with myself if I don't do something to make it right. Thank you for reading. I know I'm a terrible person, but I needed to get this off my chest. Recap. I messed up big time by sabotaging my coworker's work, and as a result, he got fired. I've been carrying around so much guilt for what I did. So today I went to work with a heavy heart and had a long meeting with the management team. I didn't hold anything back. I explained everything I had done. I admitted how I intentionally altered John's code and how I sent a faulty file to the other development team. It felt like a weight was lifting off my shoulders as I spoke, but at the same time, I knew it wasn't enough to erase the harm I'd caused. I also begged management to give John his job back. I told them that John genuinely cares about his work and always strives for the highest standard of excellence. I tried to explain that, even when he made mistakes, John was determined to fix them on his own rather than relying on others. His persistence and dedication were far greater than anyone I knew at the office, and I wanted them to see that. To my surprise, they listened. They actually called John to talk to him, and I don't know exactly what was said, but I could tell from the look on his face when he came back that he was relieved and happy to be invited back. Apparently, management had never fully understood how great of a worker John truly was. After I shared my side of the story and provided some testimonials from other coworkers who respected him, they realized just how valuable John was to the company. They even decided to raise his salary to reflect his worth. When John came back to the office, I couldn't help but apologize over and over again. I wanted to express how deeply sorry I was for what I did, but I knew no apology would ever undo the damage I caused. He might have hated me inside, but he didn't show it. Instead, he forgave me. I didn't deserve his forgiveness, but it made me respect him even more than I already did. What I did was unforgivable, and I faced the consequences. Today, I was fired, effective immediately. I don't know what I'll do now that I'm without a job, but I feel like I've done something right. My conscience feels a little clearer, knowing that John is back at work, doing what he excels at. I might have lost my job, but in a way, I think I've taken a small step toward making things right. I don't expect everyone to forgive me, but I hope that, in time, people will see that I tried to fix my mistake.